Hi, thank you for being here. This is the first time I wear one of these microphones, so it's gonna be special. Um, as Sam said, I am an artist. I am a visual artist. To clarify, that is the kind of artist that works with images, right? Representations of things that are often confused with the thing they represent. As in when someone asks you about the photograph that you have on your cell phone, and you usually say that's a picture of my dad, but you rarely say you usually say that's my dad. You don't say that's a picture of my dad, right? Um, so these semblances, then these appearances, these icons are one of my key areas of interest in the films of video, 3D animation, and also painting, where I often juxtapose live action footage with with animations, 3D animations based on events that, although I did not experience in person, had an important effect on shaping my perception of the world. The first one of these animations is Hawker Haunted, which you're seeing now in the screen, which is based on a recollection, very particular recollection of a moment where about a photograph of the bombardment of the La Moneda Palace in 1973, 8 years before I was born. So again, a moment I did not witness. And the recollection was about asking about this photograph to a relative of mine. I asked what happened with this image of the burning government palace, and the response was very strange. It was a response about performance. The response was about the fighter pilots. It said these were excellent pilots and they placed the missiles very precisely through the gates of the palace. Which is a strange answer, right? Because it's not about what was being asked. And I always thought about this moment, that answer, as a moment of cognitive deflection. To ask a simple question, why is the place burning? And to get an evasive answer. I realized then, after thinking about this moment, that though images can reveal things, they cannot reveal much if we are somehow blinded towards them. Hawker Haunted then became an allegory of this blinded vision, an image that I had not seen in person, but that, thanks to how 3D graphics was working at the time, could be recreated and in that way be actually seen. And fast forwarding many years after this, 10 years actually, and these concepts of vision and image still haunt me. Particularly the way our beliefs, prejudices, and preconceptions affect the way we see, and how, on the other hand, the images we create, be them photographs, engravings, or text, can change or amplify those cognitive predispositions. And in this context, 8 years ago, I stumbled upon a book by Miguel Rojas Mix. The title of the book was America Imaginaria. A book that was very large, beautiful book, contained engravings of imaginary beings, reminiscent of Jorge Luis Borges' book of Imaginary Beings, a book that I like very much. So this book, America Imaginaria by Rojas Mix, was an American bestiary, okay, as described by Rojas Mix himself. And he states about the book that the book was about the story of how Europe saw America was narrated from its speculation to its discovery and later to its subjugation. It's a wonderful work, the one that makes this, because he compiled creatures that were fantasies, monsters that were believed to inhabit America. Cannibals, the word itself comes from the Carib nation. Headless Ewaipanomas, formerly known as blemias in Europe. Baby-looking humanoids that turn out to be sloths. Look at the size of that thing, right? They're not that big, right? And even mermaids that Christopher Columbus himself wrote about in his diary when he stated, "I've seen 3 sirens that looked above the sea, peaked above it, but they were not half as beautiful as they were described." He was disappointed. Now, the key thing here is that Columbus was seeing through stories and myths that were circulating with particular intensity with the massification of the printing press. A fact that Miguel de Cervantes in Don Quixote from 1605 was keenly aware when he described the madness of Quixote as the result of reading too many chivalry novels. And I'm going to quote a section from Quixote, right? Might try to do an accent here because it's all Spanish. But for look there, friend Sancho Panza, where 30 or more monstrous giants present themselves, all of whom I mean to engage in battle and slay, and with whose spoils we shall begin to make our fortunes. And in a manner analogous to the famous passage of Don Quixote, seeing giants instead of windmills, the totality of the monstrous creatures described as the original inhabitants of the Americas during the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance exemplified some form of cognitive bias, either because the known was being projected onto the unknown, or because, in a much more sinister take, it served an agenda of conquest and dehumanized indigenous populations by mythologizing their territory and their inhabitants. Images and imagination, then, can become conduits to seemingly innocent mistakes, as in the case of Columbus mistaking sirens for manatees, or the adventures of Don Quixote, but can also be dangerous and damaging, as was the case with the Tapuya people, described as cannibals in the famous paintings of Richard Eckhout, or the Tupi Guaraníes, presented as human-headed sloths in Arnoldos Montanus' New and Unknown World series of copper plates, which were instrumental in representing indigenous nations as not entirely human, with the objective of manipulating imagination, perception, and consequently action. I guess the question then is, what do we do about this? If our imagination and perception seems to be inherently and historically so easy to manipulate, particularly when new technologies of communication become widespread. So imagination, perception, not entirely human beings, that's what brings me to the monster problem. Monster, a word whose etymological root in Greek is teras. Terabyte actually comes from that. It's a monstrous amount of data. I'm not kidding. And this word teras does not bear any relation whatsoever to beauty or ugliness, to good or evil, but means something like divine sign. A monster then is a signal, a being that philosopher Noel Carroll described as defiant of categorical distinctions, and that ultimately can be conceived as the embodiment of a limit between the categorically known, say the familiar, and the boundless uncertainty of the not yet known, between animal and human, between living and dead, between rational and irrational, between vigil and sleep. And then I'm sharing that engraving I love very much from Francisco de Goya, the sleep, the dream of reason, which embodies exactly that limit between vigil and sleep, which is the place where monsters appear. Therefore, psychologically, the monster, this embodiment of the categorically unknown, incites fear precisely because it defies categories and transcends limits, which can be scary. In most cases, it's very scary when you're confronted with something you don't know, or it can be scary exciting, as in the case of theme parks or horror movies, where the excitement of transgression translates into screaming and laughter. We are fascinated then by the unknown, but simultaneously we are cautious and sometimes, frankly, terrified about the risk of venturing onto the unfamiliar, of bursting our safety nets, our comfort bubbles, our comfy echo chambers. I do have, in this regard, a particular experience or relationship as a child with monsters that has to do with dreams too. They visited me in my dreams. They chased me around pools and haunted my perceptions. They also visited me in recurrent dreams, dreams that I call nowadays augmented reality nightmares. The kind of dream, you know, when you think that you woke up, but you're actually sleeping in your room. Okay, AR dream. In one of those dreams, for instance, I walked in the darkness towards some noise that I heard on the dining room and found Dracula, Hulk, and a werewolf having tea at our house while the rest of us were sleeping. I'm Chilean, we drink a lot of tea since a long time ago. Another one of these nightmares, and that is more on point, revolved around a lion and a ghost visiting me in my sleep. They had silver thimbles in each one of the fingers, and they mischievously came to my bed to tickle me. Okay? And I begged them to stop, but at the same time I was laughing uncontrollably. And then I woke up, and when I woke up to wet blankets, which was very, not a nice thing when you're like 4 or 5 years old. So having this recurrent nightmare, with its recurrent consequences, was something I felt it was very important to solve. Naturally, like, I'm not going to tell my mother it was the lion and the ghost. But in time, the solution presented itself. I got used to the visits, and I learned to experience the nightmare as a dream. At first, the lion was a humanoid lion, and the ghost was some sort of horrible and dead presence. But as nights went by, the creature ceased to be monstrous and started becoming familiar. Instead of a lion, it was a plush lion. Instead of a scary ghost, it was a playful flying bedsheet. And this coincided with the end of the night terror, the tickling, and also the end of the unfortunate consequences. In a way, by allowing myself to reimagine these monsters, by allowing them to become familiar, the images that imposed terror were slowly replaced by images that, although equally strange, were my own images, a domesticated form of terror, which became enmeshed with my pursuits as an artist and later as an educator. In that regard, I am very fond of a definition of creativity proposed by the Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben, in which he states that the philosophical element in a work of art, science, or theory is its capacity to be picked up and continued. I find that to be such a joyful proposition, right? To recognize that creation is linked to acknowledging that a painting, a movie, novel, piece of theory is never really finished, but continues in the creation of something that, even if it's linked, is new. As an artist that is also a professor, I try to share this creative enthusiasm, thinking that a class in itself can be thought of as a work of art, something that can be picked up and continued, giving rise to works of art, writings, and thoughts that become independent of the class itself, works that have, hopefully, a life of their own. My teaching philosophy in this regard is very simple. I try to share questions instead of answers. Images and the images and stories that surround these questions, in order to encourage conversations that embracing curiosity become manifest as artworks, most of them digital. And one of these conversations, one of these classes, is America Imaginaria, a course about monsters loosely inspired on the book of Miguel Rojas Mix, where we examine and discuss images and stories that relate to the role that misinformation, misperception, myths, and monsters played during the period of conquest of the Americas. And by discussing and recreating these imaginary creatures that are true embodiments of gossip and terror of the unknown, we start to learn about the circumstances of their creation, their origin as very wild stories, or even, in one case, as misinterpreted Chinese mythology. We do this in order to develop digital avatars that by the end of the course are performed using motion capture. These monsters, here you see a white panama version, then become not the embodiment of prejudice and fear, but hopefully the material expression of a disposition towards understanding what was previously an emblem of something absolutely other. So the monster not as a limit, not as a closure, but as an opening. And I really love that. This is some student work, but I really love that about art making. Its open and playful disposition towards the unresolved. Disposition that is often risky because creativity has more failures than successes, way more failures than successes, and that requires investing yourself in something you don't necessarily understand, but that is still worthy of your attention. In other words, something that is worthy of a piece of your life. That, to me, is the greatest ethical asset of art making, to spend a bit of life in something or someone you don't really understand. And there are many things nowadays that we don't understand. The future itself seems like a big unknown. And paradoxically, trust erosion coexists with very strong convictions and beliefs within a context where creating believable images, no matter how silly they are, AI images are often literally incredible, is easier than ever. And this is a world that has a lot in common with the post-printing press renaissance that is part of America Imaginaria. A world where the value of art making, more than the value of art itself, is central towards enabling a deeper, more compassionate understanding of a place where so many people see what they want to see and therefore refuse to acknowledge each other. And in this note of the importance of allowing yourself to understand and acknowledge each other and how art is a great asset towards that, I would like to acknowledge Joel Frazier for encouraging me to teach that class years ago. And I would like to acknowledge and thank my students who encouraged me to give this talk and taught me about many things I did not know. Code yoga, for instance. I've never heard about that. And also, I would like to thank particularly Anna and Nick, who helped me, coach me during this talk and allowed me to not use the platform that they were using to develop this, which was Slack or MS Teams. Regretfully, that is a monster I'm not yet prepared to confront. And lastly, I want to thank you for listening to me.